The other issue, of course, was when it came to following the Sunnah. When we look at a hadith in Bukhari, Muslim, Abu Dawud, or any of the Sahih hadiths, if you pick any hadith and this is authentic, what was the implication of that hadith? Was that hadith implying it should be put into practice by everybody? So, for example, when the Prophet ﷺ in the hadith would agree to sign treaties with this community, we go to war with this community, appoint a governor to this community, decide to break a treaty with this community. When the Prophet did that, and we say that's the Sunnah, does it mean any one of us can practice that Sunnah? You know, like anybody here can go and start assigning new governors, new sultans? Or is that a role that is a Sunnah only for a person who is head of state and commander-in-chief of the armed forces? Only such a person can declare war. Not even a judge. Not a mufti, but the head of state. The Qur'an says if you catch a thief, you cut his hand. Allah said so. And a case came to the Prophet ﷺ of a woman who stole, and the Prophet ﷺ said her hand had to be cut. Even if his daughter Fatima stole, he would have no other option but to cut her hand. If we catch a thief outside, can we cut his hand? Because the Prophet did it and Qur'an says we should do it. Can we? You only do it in your capacity as a judge, not as your capacity as just any citizen. Yeah. You're not the one who sentenced people to death. That's the job of a judge. So when we look at the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, what some scholars have had to do is to ask themselves, when the Prophet says something, does something, what are the legal implications of the Sunnah? And so they divided the Sunnah into two. Sunnah Tashri', which meant a Sunnah that had legal implications, and Sunnah that was Ghaira Tashri'. It was not with legal implications. So there are certain times the Prophet ﷺ would do something. For example, the Prophet ﷺ put a policy where he had prohibited the collection of zakat on horses. Okay? Prophet prohibited collecting zakat on horses. And everybody knew about it. At the time of Caliph Umar introduced a zakat on horses. How can Prophet say don't do it? Where did Umar get the audacity and authority to change the rule? Doesn't he know what the Prophet said? Or is it that he understood what the Prophet said better than we do? Why did the other Sahaba not criticize Umar on that one? Was the Prophet making a policy for everybody till the Day of Judgment? For some of the scholars, they view the Prophet ﷺ as removing zakat on horses as a tax relief on horses. He was encouraging more horses. Horses were important for war. And at that time, the Ummah needed a lot. So no zakat was charged on horses. By the time of Caliph Umar, there were so many horses, no scarcity of horses. And people who are in the business of renting out horses were making more profit within a week or a month than people who are keeping camels for a whole year would make. So since the objective of the former head of state, Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, had been achieved, a new economic policy comes by the new head of state, the new caliph, in his capacity as a political leader. And now he wants to widen the pool for collecting zakat for welfare benefits of the state again. And so it became important to find out, when the Prophet said or did something, did he do it in his capacity as a prophet and everybody is supposed to follow it? Did he do it in his capacity as a mufti? giving a judgment to a particular person, but not for everybody to follow. So somebody comes and asks the Prophet ﷺ, Ya Rasul ﷺ, can I kiss my wife when I'm fasting? Prophet said, yes, no problem. Another person comes to the Prophet ﷺ, can I kiss my wife when I'm fasting? He says, no. The gentleman leaves. The Sahaba said, Ya Rasul, what's going on? The other guy came, the other gentleman came, you said yes. This one comes, you said no. But the Prophet explained the reason for the difference in fatwa. The first person was a more elderly person, has greater self-control. This young person, less self-control. This was a fatwa fashioned for this person, this one for that person. You don't just pick any hadith and say that's the fatwa for every person every time. It became important to find out, when you say the Sunnah, what exactly did you mean? So some of the scholars divided the Sunnah, like Ibn Qutaybah, among the early scholars, divided the Sunnah into like 3 categories. Some divided the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ into 7 categories, into 15 categories, Ibn Qayyim, into 12 categories, Ibn Ashur. And what is the thing about these categories? It is just different classifications of the Sunnah so that we know why the Prophet did it and whether we have to follow it or not. So if the Prophet ﷺ was offered something to eat, like a particular type of lizard, a dub, and he doesn't eat it, is it for us not to eat it? Or is that just a personal preference? He doesn't eat it. If you want to eat it, you can eat it. And he allowed the Sahaba to eat. He liked to sleep on a mat. Some of the other Sahaba would sleep on beds. Was this something that was considered binding? We all should sleep on mats? Or is that a personal preference and part of zuhud of the Prophet ﷺ? And so when the Prophet would eat with hands and not spoon or not with chopsticks, did it imply we had to eat with spoons, with hands, etc.? If the Prophet wore a particular type of dress that was Arab or Yemeni dress or a Persian dress, was that the restriction of our dress code? Or was that just him wearing what he felt comfortable with among the different types of dressing that met Sharia requirement? And so when we look at the Sunnah, for the Mujtahid Imams, it wasn't as simple as there's a Sunnah in Bukhari or Muslim. No. Bukhari and Muslim and Ahmad and these scholars did not write their Sunan and Jam'u. They didn't write all these books for lay people like some of us to read. They prepared it like the people who prepare raw material for the pharmacist. And so it became important, before we just pick any hadith and start reaching grand conclusions, to understand how did the scholars understand what they call the sababul wurud, the reasons for this particular narration. The way with Qur'an you have the sababul nuzul, the circumstances when ayah was revealed. You want to also know what was the context and the circumstance when a hadith was narrated.